Okay, I think we're live. And today I just wanted to do the overwhelming calamity, also known as Al Ghashiyah, which is one of the prayers supposedly recited by Muhammad for Zuhar prayers or Juma Friday prayers. And again, it deals with Islamic eschatology, and it demonstrates the similarities between the eschatology of Islam and the eschatology of pagan polytheistic cultures, particularly if, and I don't know how much commentary there's been about this, but particularly if you go back to Greek and Roman mythology. So it begins with a question: has there not come to you the news of the overwhelming calamity? And this is a reference to Judgment Day, the Islamic version of Judgment Day. Some faces on that day shall be downcast, laboring, toiling, entering into burning fire, made to drink from a boiling spring. They shall have no food but of thorns, which shall neither fatten nor avail against hunger. So this is a description of what is going to befall people who reject Muhammad and reject Islam. And it's very similar if you look at the Roman or Greek version of the underworld and the mythos surrounding that. For example, Prometheus gave, according to legend, high love and light, he gave man fire, and as his punishment, he was trained to a rock and as he was trained to the rock, an eagle would come and tear off his flesh and eat his liver, rip out his liver and eat it every day. And at the end of the day, his liver would regrow. So this would just be perpetual punishment for disobeying Zeus and hi Inky. And this is something that would recur day after day. Or another good example is Tantalus. So Tantalus was made to stand in a pool of clean water with a tree nearby that had ripe, delicious fruit. But every time he would reach for the fruit, the tree would push away. So he'd never be able to eat it. It would be just out of his reach. And the pool, even though the pool was clean and fresh water, whenever he would stoop over to drink from it, the pool would recede. See, this is where we get the idea of something being tantalizing. And there are tons of others, not just in Greek and Roman mythology, but also I've mentioned this before. Odin, the Norse Norse god, who was tied to a tree with his own intestines, and before the Norse version of Armageddon happened. And these are some recurring themes. So you see this a lot in pagan mythology, and it's very similar when you compare the pagan world to the pagan perception of the underworld and the Muslim perception. And that's because Islam has deep roots in pagan culture. It arose in the context of a pagan environment in Arabia. Even though there were Christians and Jews, the Quraysh, Muhammad's tribe, were pagan Arab tribesmen. And like I said, I mentioned this in an earlier video, but Ibn Warraq has the book Why I Am Not a Muslim, and he actually explains the culture that Muhammad grew up in very precisely. And it's definitely worth checking out if you're interested in this. If you're interested in what gave birth to Islam, because it wasn't developed in a vacuum. It wasn't developed in a vacuum. There were things that seeds that were planted in Muhammad's mind as he was growing up that he adopted and adapted to his new religion. And this is one of them, this idea of punishments that aren't really scriptural, but you can find parallels in pagan culture. So in verse 7, it says, which will neither fatten nor bear against hunger. Other faces on that day shall be happy, well pleased because of their striving. And these are the people who are going to be rewarded and going to enter paradise. In a lofty garden, and the vision of Islamic paradise is a garden. It's somewhat transplanted the Garden of Eden, even though the description of Eden bears really no resemblance to the Islamic description of paradise, which is this very bizarre, depraved, kind of through the looking glass version of paradise or heaven. It's a very twisted, uniquely Islamic version of heaven. It's a heaven where there's no God, for for example, whereas in the Garden of Eden, God and man had a completely um they had a direct connection, and this was before the fall, before the connection between man and God was severed, and they were in complete communion. And he talked to Adam every day. So he's talking about the garden here, wherein you shall not hear vain talk. Again, this is ironic coming from Muhammad. Therein is a fountain flowing. Therein are thrones raised high, and drinking cups ready placed, and cushions set in a row, and carpets spread out. So, I mean, there are thrones, but all of these other things are really descriptions of um, really descriptions of things that Muhammad has pictured as paradisical, and they're very earthly ideas. This idea of just sitting down and relaxing on a couch or a cushion. This actually also has parallels to Greek culture and Roman culture. When you think of ancient Romans or Greeks sitting down, being served by their slaves, being served wine and grapes, and you have these particularly we have vases and bits of and mosaics and different things that describe what a leisurely, well-off Roman or Greek, how they would spend their time. And this is the type of paradise that Muhammad pictured. And in 17 it says, "Will they not then consider the camels, how they are created?" So now he's going back to the natural world as a proof for Allah. But again, this actually I think is a good argument for God. The fact that we're cognizant of our own being and the creation around us. And I say, I've said, if you're aware of your existence, you're aware of God's existence. And this goes back to Romans 1. I think this is a very persuasive argument for God. The fact that we're able to contemplate our own existence and look at the world around us. Atheists who say that there's no creator at all, I think, have a hard time reconciling that argument with the natural world and the fact that we're conscious and able to understand it and put these things into perspective. It's not like we're uh, some animal that doesn't have the ability to reason. God says in the book of Isaiah, "Come, let us reason together." This is something we're endowed with, and the fact that the idea that we're not endowed with it from a creator, that this all came about by happenstance, I think is really, really hard to justify ontologically. It doesn't make much sense. But again, he's using this to confirm the existence of Allah, not God himself. So it's a bit of a trickier argument for Muhammad. And the heaven, how it is reared aloft, and the mountains, how they are firmly fixed. And again, Muhammad thought that mountains were tent pegs, and the earth, how it is made a vast expanse. Muhammad thought the earth was flat, and he also believed in a geocentric universe. Therefore, to remind, for you are only a reminder, you are not a watcher over them. But whoever turns their back and disbelieves, Allah will chastise him with the greatest chastisement. Surely to us, and the us is referring to Allah, is their turning back. Then surely upon us is the taking of account. And again, this is ironic considering the fact that Islam also exhorts its adherents to go and forcibly convert people, to take any land that was once Muslim, reclaim it. It's a very revanchist type of ideology, and to have dominion over everyone, not just Muslims but non-Muslims alike. So here, when he's kind of and this is one of the problems with the Quran. There are verses written at different times that reflect different methodologies of Muhammad and Islam, but the idea that Muslims are just going to leave this in the hands of Allah is something that's contradicted by the Quran itself. And this is one of the ways in which the Quran is self-refuting. You have these passages that would lead you to believe that Islam was a pacific religion, that they just let people decide for themselves, and that if they don't become Muslims, then Allah will punish them ultimately. But you have other passages that were never abrogated and that have precedence within Islam that say, go out and conquer and kill and smite the necks of those who don't submit to Islam. So again, it's one of the things about the Quran that just it it, it makes the Quran collapse onto itself. You can't reconcile these two ideas: the idea of letting Allah punish, and then also going out and exacting revenge and retribution on people who slight Muslims or who refuse to listen to the message of Muhammad. Anyway, that is Surah 88, the overwhelming calamity. The next surah is the daybreak. It's slightly longer, and there are about 4 or 5 longer surahs, and then I think the longest is 9 verses, so it gradually decreases. And hopefully we'll get this done by the end of February. That's what I'm shooting for, but we'll see. Anyway, thanks everyone for coming. Corrance, Inky, Love and Light, everyone who's here, all of the mod squad. Be sure to share these videos if you feel inclined with your Muslim or non-Muslim friends. And we'll see you next time.